Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last fall general meeting. Don't forget to sign in because you do want your activity points because we do have a raffle as well as a special social that you don't want to miss out. So I'll just give a few minutes if you haven't signed in yet, whether you're scanning the QR code or the link. Okay, and then I actually did receive a message in chat about the charity miles and receiving our hours. Currently the portal is actually down, but we will get back to you when the portal is up so that you can receive your hours for it. Sorry about that. Okay, so without a further ado, these are all our upcoming events for week 8 and 9. So today is actually the last day to RSVP for the special social, and we actually have our lab fair tomorrow. Um, and then for week 9, we have so many events right there. So with office hours, share circle, all that sort of stuff. So don't miss out. Okay, so for activity points, we have our fall raffle. It will actually be live streamed on Instagram. Our Instagram is sci_Kai_UCR. It'll be live streamed next Tuesday, November 22nd at 11:30 a.m. So just like join us online. And then if you are silver, you will receive one raffle entry. If you are gold, you'll receive two. And any extra points above gold, you'll actually receive extra entries. So don't miss out on that. And then you'll be able to pick up your prize through office hours the following week, week 10, or if you're not able to make it, we can talk about it and then you can receive your prize then. But we also have our special social. This is for our gold members only. Be sure to check your emails because you have the email in your inbox and then RSVP by 8 p.m. today. And it is a discounted price of just $10 a person, so you really do not want to miss out. Okay. I'm waiting for like the in-person, the slide to change. Okay, so next up is our fall lab fair that is happening tomorrow. If you haven't RSVP, be sure to RSVP. This is just so that we can get a head count. But even if you haven't RSVP, feel free to drop by. If you know any people, any folks interested, tell them to drop by. It'll be happening 5 to 7 p.m. at Hub 302 South. And this is a great opportunity for you to just learn about the research and also, potential opportunities. But regardless, we actually also have our fundraiser. If you could just please scan the QR code, it's a GoFundMe. It would be great if y'all could just donate. It will help us out this year as well as future years to make Laughter even more successful. And again, you will receive all these information in a recap email. So don't worry about not getting it today. You won't miss out. And I see a question in chat. If we're helping during the lab fair, do we still need to RSVP? No, you do not. Just show up. Thank you. Okay, next is our RSI co-director applications. We have decided to extend the application. It is extended to next Wednesday. So be sure to apply. All the information is here, the guidelines, all that sort of stuff. This is a really wonderful opportunity. RSI is happening in spring quarter. It's our largest event hosted by SciCai. So you really do not want to miss out. If you're not interested in being a co-director, we also have committee head and committee member applications opening up in winter. And then next, if I could have Gerardo.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Gerardo Michel, and I am the director for the upcoming Psychology Winter Camp event in the winter quarter. I am looking for a team of 4 coordinators who can help me prepare and plan the entire event and, of course, facilitate it. The application was supposed to close tonight, but I have extended it to Friday. So please check out the application. And if you are interested, please apply because I would love to work with you all to bring this wonderful event to life. And please let me know if you have any questions or email the email at the bottom. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So next week, Monday, November 21st, 7 to 8, don't miss it. It's our share circle on motivation, the topic we are all super motivated to talk about. Yes, I did practice that one. So share circle is a monthly discussion group that considers psychology related topics and allows SciCai members to explore and share their own thoughts. So we really want to focus on your perspective, and we are so excited to see you guys there. It's on Zoom. Definitely check it.
Okay, and then we're having a fun little get together and it's gonna be a little tea time. This is happening Tuesday, so week 9. It's gonna be only from 12 to 1. But if you want to drop by for like 5 minutes, get your cup of tea and leave, like that's totally fine. We're just gonna hang out and then talk about psychology.
Hello, back again. I am happy to announce that we have opened up our Love It for Psych volunteer applications. So Love It for Psych is a project for us to gather stories from psychology faculty, graduate students, and undergraduate students to talk about why did you fall in love with psychology. So it's just to help us get really excited about, this field that we're all involved in. So if you are interested in helping conduct these interviews, please apply at the link that will be dropped below. It closes on Monday, November 28th. And if you have any questions, always feel free to email us, DM us in Discord, whatever. Okay, and that is all for organization announcements. And now we are going to go ahead and transition to our labs and research panel. So I would like to have our panelists start by introducing themselves, and we will go ahead and start off with Annie here on Zoom.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me join you for your last meeting of the quarter. So just a little bit about myself. I'm a 5th-year PhD student in Dr. Sonia Lubomirski's Positive Activities and Wellbeing Lab. I'm interested in interventions to improve psychological well-being as well as mechanisms, kind of understanding how and why those interventions work. So before coming to UCR, I took a bit of a detour. I was a psych major and then worked in marketing research for 5 years while also doing some post-bac research in psych labs. So I just say all of that in case people have questions about kind of any of those pieces. I'd be happy to answer them.
Hi all, I'm Justin. I'm actually a undergraduate here from UCR. So I got my BS in neuro and then I minored in math. What else did I do? Got a psychology master's along the way though with the PhD program that I'm currently in. So that's cool. And then yeah, I'm currently a 5th year in the psychology department in behavioral neuro, working on a PhD. I guess, yeah, originally I was interested in med school, but then I decided to work in a lab for a little bit because you need to kind of do that to get into med school. But I liked it so much because you don't have to work with people when you work in a mouse lab. And that was really cool. So I really liked the medicine, but the people part I was not so excited about. And so I learned how to do surgery with rodents, and that's currently what I do. And I try to figure out how prefrontal cortex works in fear discrimination learning. And I'm going to talk about more of that later. So yeah, I just applied to the lab. I shotgun emailed like 5 professors and then one of them responded to me and then I made it in that lab and I've been there for like 9 years now. So that's fun. And then yeah, populations network. My research has moved more to computational stuff. So I do a lot of mathematical modeling, computational work in tensor decomposition and graph theory, which I can also talk about, but I know you're psych people, so anytime I say math, you say ew. So that's cool. But yeah, so that's me. Cool.
Hopefully y'all can hear me. So I did my undergrad at Cal State San Bernardino in bioinformatics and biopsychology with the minor in computer science. I liked the interdisciplinary type of stuff. So neuroscience, I guess, ended up being my way to go. So working on my PhD in neuro here at UCR. I'm currently in Kelly Huffman's lab and I'm a 6th year, hopefully going to get out in June. And let's see, I'm like, what else? My lab experience as an undergrad is like all over the place. I don't know if we want to save that for later, but I guess briefly, like literally everything from like robotic stuff to working with plants to doing computational stuff to more human like cognitive type of research that's like all over. But we'll probably get into that later, but yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ramona. Thanks for having me. I'm a 3rd year in Sonia Lubomirski's lab, and with Annie, I study happiness and well-being interventions. In this space, I'm especially interested in volitional personality change, which is sort of a budding area of research. Broadly, our lab is interested in boosting in social connections. So I'm interested in how we help people become more extroverted if that is something that they want to do, and how we might help them overcome barriers like shyness. So I kind of pivoted in my academic career. I used to study political science and sociology, and I was interested in what lay people knew about politics, which is still really relevant. I studied social psychology and political psychology at the London School of Economics. And because my interests sort of changed over the years, I did something called a post-bac program so I could get training in the areas I wanted to go into. And I did this at UC Irvine, so I could tell us all if we're interested later in maybe what a post-bac program is. But I was in 2 labs. One of them did focus on emotional well-being, and one was a lab that focused on trauma from a neurobiological approach. And I think that's it. After I completed my post-bac program, I worked full-time at UCI. I was hired by one of my PIs, and I applied to grad school from there. And now I'm at UCR and happy. So happy to talk more about your questions soon.
All right, fantastic. So we will go ahead and hop straight into it. So first, I want to get started with having you guys elaborate more on what you do within your lab specifically. So if we can start, whoever wants to start off.
I could start just kind of cycling through all the variety of tasks that grad students do. So that's actually something I wasn't as aware of as an undergrad, that you are really involved. I mean, it's lab dependent, but you're involved in every stage of the research process, which I think is really fun. So everything from research design, coming up with your study design measures, through data collection and analysis. So yeah, I don't know what else to say in terms of research tasks, but there's also, administrative tasks that we do as well, a lot of writing, data analysis, so a huge range there. So happy to answer any specific questions about those.
Yeah, I can go next. Likewise, grad students tend to be involved in research from top to bottom, at least in our lab. So as Annie mentioned, we start at the top in terms of research design, and I find like that brainstorming process to be one of the most fun parts of being in a lab, is being with like minds and sort of thinking about like, how can we answer the questions that we have? And then, yeah, from data collection and all of the logistics and admin stuff that happens before you can actually run a study, like how do I post this on SONA and get IRB approval, which means like, how do I consider human ethics in my research? And then once you have data, you of course analyze it, and then you work on the best way how to present that for audiences. And that might be a poster or a talk or a publication. So I think that's it in essence. And then also once you get a little bit more senior in the lab, you can mentor research assistants or incoming graduate students. So yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell.
All right. So basically reiterating a lot of the stuff they say. So background, I work on mice and I do a lot of like molecular work as well as behavioral work. So that kind of stuff, everything from, I guess, like kind of helping design the experiment to actually getting that data, analyzing the data, writing the papers, all of that stuff is in there. A big part of it too is like mentoring your undergrads and incoming graduate students and any rotators that you might get that come through the lab. And then also I do a lot of like, there's like other, I guess, administrative stuff that haven't been mentioned yet. If you're in a lab that does more, I guess, like STEMmy type of stuff where you're like molecular work or something, you're going to have to deal with like safety inspections. My lab, since we work with drugs, we do like stuff with the DEA, so you have to deal with that. IACUC for animal research and all that fun stuff and getting certifications and all that. So I guess that's kind of the different side of things with animal research, but yeah, there's there's a lot going on, I guess, just kind of in general, but
Yeah, that's about what I would say too. Everything's already been touched on, but I don't know, as you get older, your prospects change, I guess, as an upper grad student. So you'll be more of a leader in your lab than a little grunt working everything. That's what you get undergrads to do, all the fun stuff we don't want to do. And then you get your other graduate students to hopefully teach them and do other fun stuff as well. So, but yeah, you do more lab managing, so buying reagents, figuring out how to use reagents and whatnot. There's a lot more safety involved, at least in our labs that we have to do, because yeah, the mice bite, and if that happens, what are your protocol that you're going to do to fix that? But yeah, I mean, we write posters, we write papers, we write grants. It doesn't stop, actually. It all starts from pretty much day one. It's just to be more involved. And it does feel like in the beginning, you have no idea what to do for any of that. And as you get older, you'll kind of figure it out through the struggle of it all. But yeah, everything else they said, though, also applies in terms of just the work you do, who you work with. You work with the PI. Some PIs, I know some work with them like once a month, they'll talk to. Others, they'll have like weekly meetings like my PI. So some you have more interactions and you may like that, you may not like that. It kind of depends on you and the lab you want. So yeah, cool. That's all I got.
Just, sorry, just really quickly. Okay, just really quickly, for those who don't know, can you elaborate on what a PI is?
The PI is your principal investigator. So that's the faculty mentor that you're going to work with. So you apply to them. So a lot of students actually come up to me in classes like, oh, I like your research. Can I join your lab? And as us grad students, we're like, yeah, sure. But really, you got to talk to the person in charge of the lab, which is the faculty mentor, and that's going to be your PI. So in general, us as grad students have really no control over like who gets into a lab. We can like recommend you, be like, yeah, they're a cool person, but we can't say, yeah, you have, because they're ultimately the leader of the lab and have full control over everything. So that's what the PI is. So for Kat, it's Huffman. For me, it's Corzus. I think, would you say Annie, who was your PI?
Both of us, both Ramona and I are Sonia Lumirsky. We're in the same lab.
There you go.
yeah, but it really depends on your PI and like how much, I guess, say you have on things, because some are more hands-on, some are more hands-off. But yeah, I guess we'll probably get more into that with other questions too, but.
Okay. Sorry, little technical difficulties. So I know some of you kind of touched on this, like Just, I know something that you did as an undergraduate, but why did you guys specifically select your labs? Like, what was it about that, you know, PI or that lab that was so appealing for you guys?
I can go, I guess. Yeah. So I started in undergrad my sophomore year. 'Cause I needed lab experience. And so I just emailed a couple of people, see what labs they could do. I just really read whatever they had on the website and just said, yeah, sure, that sounds kind of interesting. But I had no idea actually what they did in the lab, because oftentimes you'll read their website and it's kind of vague. It's just like vagueness of what is generally the research is done. Like I didn't even know my lab worked with mice. And so then when I got there, I was like, oh, interesting. But it just really depended also on like, once I got in the lab, how much you are willing to commit to your lab. Because at first, for a lot of grad students, it's hard to like put undergrads into projects because they don't know what they're capable of doing. And a lot of them just kind of like fade out eventually without doing stuff. So if you want to be a really productive research assistant, you have to insert yourself into projects and talk to grad students as much as possible. To the point of being annoying, but not like too annoying. But like you really got to be on top of them because they have their own classes, projects, stuff they're working on. And so that's what I was doing a lot, is like if they were going to run an experiment, I was like, can I watch? Can I see that? Can I participate in some manner? And that's how I started getting more and more involved. And then I could do more of the fun stuff. So I got to do a lot of rodent surgery. So it's not getting too much to the technicalness, but I inject viruses into brains and then I make neurons do different things, either making them express glowy proteins or making neurons shut down or do other fun things, again in a very general way. There's a whole slew of things that needs to go into it, but essentially then I helped develop as a grad student then technology called one photon calcium imaging, which allows me to visualize neurons in real time while mice go around and do certain behaviors. And I really liked that. And I decided, I'm going to stay in this lab as an undergrad. And then I applied to other schools. And then I decided, to keep going in this direction because I already had familiarity. If I went to another school, if you're doing grad school, you have to like rotate in some labs. And I didn't necessarily want to do that because I knew I liked my research. So I wanted to stay in my lab and like keep going. So that's how I got into grad school and just kept continuing with my project. But I'm definitely, it's not always you're going to just stay in the same lab. You should try to branch out, but it's not uncommon. So I guess that's me.
Yeah. I guess kind of going off of that, because you mentioned rotations. So my department does do rotations. So you don't come in with a set professor you're working with. Like you actually get to kind of try out professors to see if you like them for a bit. So that's, I guess, kind of the cool thing about it. Depending on your program that you choose, you may get to do that. But I rotated in this lab and I just liked that it had like a mix of all kinds of things. Like I got to do behavior, I got to do the molecular work. There was like also some human stuff I could do on the side. So being able to kind of do all this stuff. And then they had a collaboration with like a computational team up at like UC Davis and University of Sheffield in England. So I had like a chance to work with some of that stuff. And because I was so indecisive as an undergrad, I literally tried out so many different labs, like it was insane. But just to kind of see what was out there and really get that experience and figure out what I liked, and still couldn't quite make the decision when I got to grad school, but then was like, okay, we're doing this because that's a mix of everything. And that's kind of where I ended up. But yeah.
I can go next. As I mentioned, it took me a little longer to figure out what precisely I wanted to do. So I was in a developmental lab as an undergrad. I ended up being a lab manager for a year. Fortunately, it was a paid position, but a paid grant position. So that was a very limited time. It was just under a year. And at that point, I knew I loved research. I loved psychology, but I didn't have a specific enough research interest. So I decided to get a job doing research and try to figure it out from there. So because I didn't know what I wanted to do yet, I focused on trying to get transferable skills that I knew would help me in grad school. So I never, really wanted to be in marketing research, but I ended up really enjoying it. I stayed there for 5 years and then actually ended up volunteering for a health psychology lab where I started learning more about the type of research I do now. So when I started reading papers by Sonia actually and kind of similar topics, I realized that was what I wanted to study and kind of went from there. And fortunately it worked out, but again, it took me a while to really hone in on my research interests.
All right, so I think I really refined my interests in the post-bac program at UC Irvine that I mentioned. Even, I don't remember if I mentioned, but I did work full-time a little bit like Annie. I was a research analyst in a couple of positions, but I was reading psychology in the background. So I thought, I should probably go to school. I do this for free and for fun. So I didn't mention this in like all of my interests, but one thing that I am interested in well-being is self-reflection and how we can do that sort of adaptively. Like some of us in the room might relate that sometimes when we think about ourselves, like it's a negative feeling, right? The voice in our head tends to be harsh. So I study things like self-compassion and how we think about ourselves, things like mindfulness and how we sort of quiet the self if it gets too loud. So when I applied to social personality programs, a lot of the labs I got into were not really well-being labs. Like I was interested in the well-being angle of adaptive self-reflection, but a lot of people focused on the self in theories like self-monitoring or mindfulness, as I mentioned. So I did my interviews and I winded up coming to UCR, even though Sonia was probably the furthest departure of what I said I'd originally study, because I was just impressed with her as a person and as a scientist. So I would say, like, if you have options, that you should go to the person that you think has a really interesting trajectory in terms of what they want to do next. So when I told her, I'm interested in how we think about ourselves, or maybe when that becomes like problematic, like if we're harsh to ourselves or whatever. And she was like, well, I'm going to study MDMA, and that's up and coming. And we could think about how the self dissolves under psychedelics or things that are like psychedelics, like MDMA isn't a pathogen. I was like, oh, nobody is doing that. So, and she's also just really well connected. That's something I would think about too, is like if their network sort of becomes your network. So based on things I was describing, she was like, oh, I'm friends with so-and-so. I mean, she tends to be like that, but I'm only a third year and I've got to work with really cool people so far. So in the laundry list of research interests I mentioned, I got to work with really cool people at NYU for my second year project who are sort of specialists in their fields. Right now, I'm writing up a grant with somebody called Steve Cole at UCLA, who's sort of at the frontier of social genomics. So I would say like the two things that I was attracted to most is where Sony was taking her research, which was really novel because you get to be part of that ride too. Wherever your PI goes, you get to go. And then, yeah, maybe there's sway in the field and who they can connect you with. And I got to, I think, benefit from that a lot since I've been here.
Okay, so if anyone on Zoom, in person, or even if the panelists have any questions, feel free to drop them in chat or let me know. But for now, I actually want to go back to something that you touched on earlier, Annie, about skills for undergraduates to carry over into graduate research. Can you guys talk about what skills you think undergraduates should develop in order to pursue research after graduation?
Yeah, there are some that seem obvious, but I would say don't become obvious until you don't have them. So one is time management. Again, it seems like something really basic, but I think working a full-time job in a really fast-paced company made me learn that really quickly, and it helped me be more self-driven as a graduate student, because a lot of the time, I mean, there are often deadlines that you have to meet, but a lot of the work is self-driven. How you manage your time is up to you, in some labs and in for some projects. So I think that was a big one that I didn't expect and hadn't really seen as a skill before working full-time.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is getting familiar with data and numbers, even if you're not doing proper data analysis yet. So even if you're just becoming familiar with Excel and spreadsheets, like on the back end, some of, oops, I'm sorry, my little earbud popped out. Like some of the more popular like statistical software you'll be dealing with, you kind of have to think about numbers in grid format. And I feel like that could be really intimidating to some people. So just getting mildly acquainted with numbers and data, I think, is important. And I know that's like probably a dry thing, but it's I think really critical in grad school. I think when people are interested in psychology, sometimes they're more interested in the ideas and the theories, and that definitely like plays out. But stats, especially if you like want to make claims about things, sort of underlies all of what we do, right? Because people are interesting because of variation, and statistics is what lets us describe what we're seeing. So I would say get comfortable with numbers. I certainly wasn't in undergrad, and I had to build up that confidence. But yeah, once you have that in your back pocket, I think it's helpful to have.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate that too, I think really paying attention, especially in your stats classes now, because for my program, we're not required to take statistics. So a lot of my classmates are clueless when it comes to running even basic stats like a t-test or something like that. So depending on the program that you end up in, you may or may not have the opportunity to take a statistics course. And if that's the case, you might struggle a little bit more. They usually do have resources on campus though to help you with that stuff. But yeah, that's something just to kind of put out there. And also, I think like getting familiar with reading like research papers and really being able to like dissect what's going on within the paper is really important, because you're going to be writing papers yourself. So you're going to need to know how to like pull things from sources and like do all that kind of stuff. a lot of grad school is a lot of reading, and you'll see that. I think I underestimated the amount of reading that I would be doing, but yeah.
Yeah, stats is good, but hard. Other stuff you guys could do, just in terms of like simple things, is just being driven yourself as undergrads and then as grad students, because if you don't like your research, then nothing's gonna get done, that's for sure. But just also on top of that, you know, because you come in as either an undergrad in a research lab or going into grad school, you have to go in with the knowledge that you probably don't know anything yet. You might have some experience, but because you don't know anything, you need to know that other people now have to teach you stuff. And so you need to become more motivated to be in the lab and be there when people can teach you stuff, because nobody's going to just say like, oh, I'm going to do this now, like you should join me. Some might, but most of them don't, because they're doing their own thing, so they're not really thinking about you. And so that's why you have to be driven to be in the lab all the time to just say, can you teach me this now? Or if you are doing something, can you do that? And so a lot of that kind of falls on you, not really the other people. And then others, like simple things, just like emailing. Be constantly emailing. You may feel like you're annoying, but it's better for us if we see that you continuously email us than you email us once and then 3 months later you're like, hey, I emailed you 3 months ago, and we're gonna be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So be continuous with emails and just being like on top of your research. If you're gonna come in when you say you're gonna come in when you say you're gonna come in. Because again, like for us with mice and stuff, we have very specific timelines to work with. And if you're coming in late or just not showing up, that hurts us, and we have to kind of reschedule around a lot of that. So just being on time, being diligent, and all that is very easy things to come in with your labs, and it carries over into even outside of research. So, and again, shouldn't have to say it, but I see it more often than not where I'm like, you guys need to get on this a little bit with my undergrads. So yeah.
I also think,
This is a
again,
question from one of our, oh, sorry, Annie, go ahead.
oh, no, just being able to demonstrate that you can solve problems on your own and work independently. That's something that, again, in the workforce or in a lab, people will support you, but if you show up and you haven't even tried to solve a problem, or you just, you know, people lose patience quickly. Not grad students so much, but maybe that applies more to the workforce.
This is a question from one of our other members. Can you guys talk more about how can RAs integrate into a lab and start working on their own projects?
I think that's going to be really lab dependent. So you could even, if you're interviewing for multiple labs and that's something you know you're interested in, I would ask it up front. Or say, you know, do you have any data with variables you haven't looked at, or something that there would be, you know, room or timeline permitting for an RA to join. Because I think sometimes what happens is there's like a big ongoing project, and then if it's a years-long thing, it's hard to then kind of break a piece off. But then there are other data sets where it's a lot easier. So if that's something you know you're interested in, keep that in mind when you're interviewing and they ask you, do you have any other questions? I would ask that.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Like, I feel like sometimes undergrads are shy about communicating their interests, and maybe sometimes that's not always fully formed, but I would communicate as much as possible, like, oh, I have an inkling towards like studying family dynamics or whatever it might be. And as Annie mentioned, there could be some semblance of that construct in data that was already collected. So you get to probe it if the lab agrees. When I was at UCI, even in the trauma lab, there were some like data sets that I'm not a trauma researcher, but definitely had constructs that I was interested in, like rumination, which is a kind of maladaptive self-reflection, right? So I would just communicate your interests even as they update. And yeah, it's interesting, like the sort of possibilities that open up when you do that. So don't be shy to say what your interests are, and as they grow, let people know what they are.
Yeah, I think it's really lab dependent, because many labs don't really have the undergrads do their own projects. A lot of times you kind of get tacked onto a graduate student's project and you help them out with things. There are ways you can get your own project. So if any of you are in like the honors program, that's one way to do it, is you do your honors thesis within a lab and you can have your own project that way. There's also different types of funding opportunities that you may want to look into, like Mark U Star or like RISE or different types of fellowships will often give like stipends, and that also looks really good on your resume for when you're applying to grad school, med school, whatever it may be, to have those kind of opportunities. So if you can get something like that, look into it. I know recently too, there was like a minorities in research scholarship that just came out. I think the application's past due, but for next year, keep an eye out for that one as well. But there's different things that you can kind of apply to, and sometimes you get your own project by doing something like that.
That and more what Kat said, it's pretty rare that you as an undergrad will have your own project, because there's anything we're just like, oh yeah, just go out there and do it. You'll be tacked on to a graduate or postdoc project, and they may give you smaller stuff to do. Because again, you generally don't have much experience with a lot of because a lot of stuff is coding these days in any lab. So if you don't have any experience coding, you're gonna have to learn it. So the best way to get a project, again, start out in the lab strong, showing up, working with your graduate students, and if they give you small things to do and they do it and you turn it in, then they'll tell the PI they're really good at doing this, and then you're more likely to get your project in a future setting. Because if you can't demonstrate though already that if a graduate student's giving you projects and you haven't followed through on them, then they won't recommend you that you'll get your own project, because if you couldn't do their things, why would you get your own? And again, if you're in your lab more and you understand, you're learning more stats, or you're learning whatever technique you need to, that'll help you get your own project to do your own thing. So again, it just goes, usually actually when you get into a lab, your first quarter is almost your trial quarter for a lot of people. So they're gonna see how well you stick in the lab and if you're gonna continue doing stuff. So that's the time to really be proactive and productive. You never get a project right off the bat, that's for sure. But it is something to talk about with your PI and graduate students and work with them as much as you can and figure out from there. So.
Just as a reminder, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask our panelists, please let us know. We would love to hear all your wonderful thoughts. This is actually a question that a member who couldn't make it asked me to ask you guys, but how important is it to develop a strong relationship with the graduate students in one's lab?
Generally, generally, it's more important to develop your relationship with grad students than even the PI. Because my PI, I see him once a week, and I'm a grad student. So you guys as undergrads, when I was an undergrad, I saw him maybe once a month or in lab meetings. So I almost was never seeing the PI himself as an undergrad. So definitely work with graduate students, because they'll be able to recommend you to the PI, who then says, oh, they're doing good jobs and whatnot. And if you want letters of rec, the graduate students, they'll often ask us, the PIs, what does this person do in the lab? Because again, usually the PI isn't in the lab. So they actually usually have no idea who you are. And so they'll ask us, what do they do? How are they working? Are they good and loud and stuff? So that's how you're going to do that. So definitely be on good terms with the graduate students, because we're the ones doing the majority of the work. PIs just write the grants and look fancy, take all of our work. But
yeah, some labs you won't really see the PI at all. And even as a grad student, I don't really see my PI very much at all. But yeah, I think it's really important as an undergraduate to talk with a grad student, because like he mentioned, there is oftentimes too, I've been asked to write a letter and she'll edit it. So I will have more of a perspective on what that student is doing, and every little detail that they don't get to see because they're not there as often. But also as a graduate student, when you're coming in, it's important to make those relationships with fellow graduate students, because that will often kind of get you through school, because you'll kind of see when you're going through PhD, it's kind of a roller coaster, ups and downs all the time. So it's really good to have a nice support group that you can kind of talk to, or even just talk about experiments or something if you don't want to get into personal stuff. But it's always good to have help, because if you are stuck on something, someone else may know. which also leads to networking with other labs as well. So I have a lot of friends in all kinds of different departments, and sometimes it comes in handy because then you're like, oh, do you know how to do this thing with this code? Or do you like maybe a chemistry thing, like we're stuck like looking at this reagent going, what the heck do we do to get this concentration because the instructions don't say, and then you contact your chem buddy and they're like, oh yeah, do this. So it's good to kind of branch out, and like I'm sure many of you do that already as undergrads, so continue to do that as grad students, because a lot of people fall into that trap of like, I guess, being kind of stuck in their lab and not really going out and talking to people at all, or like even sometimes to their own department. So I would really encourage networking.
Be social.
Yeah.
As undergrads and as grad students.
Yeah, so I would say to echo what other people have said, definitely try to build relationships with grad students, because we are probably your first line of contact, and maybe your only line of contact, depending on how busy a PI is in a given laboratory. And then, yeah, relationships once you're in grad school with fellow grad students, I think is so important. You're in this workspace for probably 5+ years, so it's good to get along with your family, right? And odds are they have the same interests as you do. You're in the same lab, so it's good to bounce ideas off each other. I think, as Justin mentioned, like when you go to grad school, you can assume you know nothing. So you do teach each other like a lot of things as you go along. Like a lot of people in this Zoom room or in the room that you're in now are probably sort of best in class, right? And that gets equalized when everyone's in grad school. Everyone is so impressive. So it's good to hang on to each other and then sort of go through it together. And yeah, Annie and I are buds, and she has taught me so much since I've been here, and we collaborate a lot on projects too. So I hope everyone has an Annie when they get to grad school.
Well, thank you for saying that, Ramona. I think I underestimated, just how isolating some of the work is, but also how many opportunities there are to connect with people when you look for them. So just, once you're in grad school, but just to reiterate everything that people have said about talking to grad students, when, if you're applying to a PhD program, master's program, whatever it is, the letters can look very similar if someone doesn't know you as a person. So it's really important to make a relationship with someone who can speak to you and what makes you different from other applicants. And I think that's more likely to be a grad student. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask us questions. If you're in a lab, grad students usually really enjoy talking to research assistants too. That's one reason we're here, is that we really like that part of our job.
We have a question in the chat from one of our members. As a first year, what would you recommend writing on our CV? Should we write achievements we got our senior year in high school?
Sorry, just a clarifying question, because I think that was a direct message. So if you're a first year in undergrad applying to a research assistant position, right? Is that what you would mention? Okay. I would think so. I mean, our lab tends to hire upper class undergraduates, right? So I can't speak to that too much if you're a freshman, but yeah, I imagine if it's relevant, I'd have to think of more specific examples, but yeah, if that's what you have in your history to date, I think some things I did in high school were sort of relevant for research, but I think I'd need a little more context. But yeah, I wouldn't bar that from your CV if that's what your relevant history is so far.
I think especially if you had a leadership role in any way or something where you showed, again, being able to either work independently or do something that you were passionate about. If it's in high school, like I wouldn't, like Ramona said, I wouldn't leave it off just for that reason. If it's relevant, keep it on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've gone over plenty of CVs for our RAs going into the lab. Big thing is GPA. Because if your GPA is suffering already, then joining the lab is going to make it worse usually, because you're going to commit more time to it. So, we're not looking for 4.0s usually, but at like 3.0 should be like 3.0 or higher, generally speaking, unless you can like attest to why maybe you had a couple of rough classes. But GPA is a big one. And then just like interests. And then more so on your CV, willing to say, I want to work with this, because we'll teach you. It's unlikely you know coding or, even any of our behavior that we do, you probably know nothing of. So if you just say, I'm willing to work with animals, I'm willing to do this code, I'm willing to learn stats or Excel, that's more interesting to us than saying, I already know it, because sometimes they say they know that, and then I have to unteach them what they do know, because I'm like, that's wrong. Don't do it like that. So yeah, more just interest of I want to do this is better to say either in your CV, cover letter, or anything you send to PI is more interesting than just what you already know sometimes.
Yeah, I think some labs, like I've heard of some that are really picky on the GPA stuff. Like my lab, not so much. I'm looking more for like a student that's going to be like motivated and actually want to come in and do stuff and willingness to learn. Because I've seen a lot of students like over the years that maybe have a kind of a crappy GPA, but they're really great in labs. So like, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be, good or bad at something based on GPA. I've also had 4.0 students come in and they're just like, I don't know how to do anything. And like, they're like not really willing to learn. They're so focused on like, I'm just going to go to class and do this, so it kind of really depends. I think a lot of it's like having that motivation and wanting to learn and that curiosity that can really drive you. So if you are on the lower end of the GPA spectrum, like don't be too worried about that. Also, don't let that discourage you from applying to graduate schools, because I've known plenty of people that have gotten in with lower GPAs, but in those cases, there's usually other things in their resume that make them stand out, or they have networked with those PIs and they know them already, and like that's kind of you're in. So I guess keep that in mind, like networking is really important, and then having other experiences besides just, class, like go do some leadership roles, go volunteer somewhere, go, do something else just to kind of set yourself apart.
Thank you guys so much for sharing all that really helpful information. We have a lot of people who are interested in joining labs, so that is helpful. I'd like to transition to focusing more on what you all feel about, your labs, your passions and stuff. What's something about research, either conceptually or specific to the work that you're doing, that gets you just very excited and passionate?
I can start. I think being in the well-being lab, like I think to some degree, everyone wants to be well or happy, whatever that looks like for some people. So I get excited that our science is really applied, like the takeaways, once we have them, are things that people can apply in daily life. So for those who don't know, our well-being interventions are also called positive activities, and they tend to be like really easy things people can do once or a few times a week that tend to boost well-being. So I get excited that there's application and that we improve lives. And whenever you tell people you study happiness, it's always such a conversation starter. So I just have fun talking about this with other people or like at parties. So yeah, I think the application of the work.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in grad school, it's really important to identify things at each stage that you enjoy doing, because often the big picture seems really far away, or the application. So for example, like I actually really enjoy coding and learning R, and not to say I'm very good at it, but that makes it more satisfying when it works. So having things that you enjoy doing and can kind of like get in the zone with it, and schedule your kind of create your schedule in a way that you could really dive into stuff that you find exciting, making sure you save time for that too. Kind of anything where you're learning and practicing new skills is exciting to me.
For me, I like working at the bench. So I do a lot of bench work, whether it's histology, working with mice, or doing a lot of coding at this stage now too. So learning the next computational model and just seeing everything that I get to see, which is really cool with network models. Also, one thing that's fun about research is it's theoretically new. Like nobody has ever seen what you're seeing at that moment. And hopefully it is a new discovery that you can publish out there, and now it is like your own thing that other people can use and hopefully advance stuff. So there's always that aspect of being the first there and being able to publish it and building, whether it's a very, very, very narrow aspect of research, which generally most papers are. They're never these like awe-inspired, crushing, moving the field, but usually they add one thing and the next papers can build on it. So that's what's kind of fun about it.
Yeah. I guess for me, it's more of like the question of like, why do things work the way they do? For my lab, I study how alcohol affects like babies' brain and behavioral development during pregnancy and around the time of pregnancy. So a lot of like, that stuff's like relevant to real life. And I want to know why some people are affected more than others and like what exactly is going on. So a lot of it is just like curiosity and stuff that kind of drives me with that. And then also the interactions with the students and being able to like teach them and like, oh, like look at this cool stuff and kind of, I guess, spark that, science bug in those students and get them going early.
What would you say the most difficult aspect of being in a lab or being a researcher is?
Yeah, where to start? Just realizing that at least you're in a PhD program, you have signed up for a 5-year contract at the minimum. So it is by no means I'm going to finish this project by the weekend anymore. So, and you're going to probably have days, weeks, or months that are just not fun anymore because either your research doesn't work, because it's unlikely. A lot of people think I did this, I had this idea and it totally worked. And that is rarely the case. So there is a sludge of just trying to like get through your data, and then just being in grad school can be intimidating / difficult, especially with your PI, especially as you get older, because they expect better results and whatnot. And you're just like, I can't get that right now because for whatever reason it's not working. So just being persistent, I guess, as you're going through this to keep like a positive attitude. At the beginning, you're like, oh, this is cool, I'm doing new science. Then by the end, you're like, oh man, it's not like fun and entertaining anymore. So yeah, being persistent, keeping kind of, that little spark in your eye, finding the little things that you can still do to keep you going in grad school is definitely something that you need to like hone in on. And just like self-care. I know everybody like says it, but whatever you do, your little hobbies outside of grad school, because you will lose a lot of your interest in like other things outside of grad school. I have to get this done. I have my research and whatnot. And so I know a lot of people stop exercising, they stop doing the things they do, they lose their weekends. And by your 3rd year, you burn out. And then you're like, I got to start exercising again. And then it's hard to get back into it. So just keeping yourself on a schedule of, doing whatever you need to do to be happy, to keep exercising and all that other stuff is hard to do in grad school, but it's something that you have to do. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Oh man, I'm like, where to start? Well, I guess it depends too on like how far you're into the program, because like your first year, your struggle is probably going to be more getting adjusted to grad school, taking those classes and all that stuff, and then figuring out what research you're going to be doing. But then as you go further on, like you have the stress of qualifying exams or like trying to finish your projects to graduate and all of that. And then in the midst of all that, you're like dealing with just bureaucracy within the system, and a lot of stuff goes on behind doors that you guys don't see until you get in there. So being able to navigate those environments and really, I guess, know your resources, network, and like do what you can to like kind of navigate that, as well as like time management and really staying on top of your stuff, because a lot of grad school is self-motivated. Like if you're not doing things all the time, like you don't have someone who's going to be constantly holding your hand and like, okay, like let's do this today. Maybe some PIs will be that way, but in a lot of cases, it's like, okay, go do your stuff. And then you don't talk to them for a while. And then they come back and they're like, where's my data? So then you're expected to have things done. So you really have to stay on top of it and like manage your time. but also, yeah, factoring in self-care and everything, because it is really easy to just kind of get so consumed with your work that you just kind of burn out.
Yeah, and I think another challenging piece of being a grad student is knowing or even being able to prioritize your work tasks, because we do have a lot of different roles that feel equally important all the time. And you can't do all of them at once. And you can't even do all of them in one day sometimes. So, you'll have multiple projects you're working on, you have to prioritize within that. And then you might have especially in a PhD program at the beginning, you have your classwork. So it felt very strange to me to even think about sacrificing any of the quality of my classwork for research, but sometimes you have to make that trade-off. If you have a grant due, maybe your project for class is a little worse than you want it to be. But then just learning how to be okay with that and say, I made that choice and it was more important for me to work on the grant today, and not beat yourself up about it. So kind of just realizing that we're put into situations where there are a lot of kind of competing priorities, and you can kind of make your own schedule a lot of the time, even if it doesn't feel like you can. So.
I think something that might be frustrating at first is maybe having bigger research ambitions in the beginning than you have the skill set or the knowledge for on the onset. Like, I'm thinking of some conversations I have with ambitious undergrads, and I mean, this happens for early grad students too. Someone was telling me after class, and I love having these questions. She was like, I'm interested in this phenomenon and whether we can explain it by like genes or environment. And I think I can answer that for my honors thesis. And I mean, you could probably summarize like what that debate is like. I think part of, but we can't answer that yet, right? Like, part of the graduate training is like developing answerable research questions and like really learning how modest we should be about what we can answer, and then sort of how the research design gets informed by that. So I think having big questions and not being able to answer them initially, and learning that we have to knock things down piecemeal, is something that a lot of people learn, but that's satisfying too if we get to like chip at the puzzle. Or I'm mixing metaphors, but you get what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for sharing. We are almost out of time, but I'm hoping that you guys will be able to stay and give a few brief words of either advice or wisdom to our budding undergraduate researchers.
All right, we can go. Just be motivated. So if you pick one thing we didn't say earlier, try not to work in multiple labs. I know plenty of undergrads like doing that, or they somehow think it's like good, but on our side, it doesn't show us that you're any better than like other undergrads. I actually think you're worse usually than people who stay in one, because it's hard for you to commit now all your time to all these labs. So someone is now not getting like your full potential essentially. And so like when I see an undergrad who's already in another lab, I'm gonna like ask, why do you want to work now in ours as well? Like, you kind of have to pick one or the other. So be motivated in the lab that you're in. You can move to a different lab. That's okay. But trying to be in both is definitely, man. So just be motivated, know what you want to do, read before you get into a lab. Like, I know you won't understand the papers probably to their full extent, but just to get an idea of what they're going to do. What are their subjects? What is kind of their general, area of expertise and stuff like that. And that helps you inform the PI when you're interviewing with them, that you've actually read their research and you have an understanding of why you want to do that and the projects and how you can get involved. If it's coding, working with surveys, working with mice, or anything like that. So just be diligent in your work and be on time and stuff like that is good to do. Basically in any position, but definitely good for undergrads.
I guess stay motivated and persistent, because that'll get you a lot of places. Also networking, super important. Just keep that in mind.
I would say also that kind of having your big picture goals in mind, especially toward the end of your time at UCR. My goal was to go to grad school, and then I was a senior in college and realized that's not really a goal. It is, but I didn't know why or what I wanted to do. So I think always having that in the back of your mind, like, what am I working towards? Even if you don't know, it really helps guide the decisions you make and for you to, better spend your time. If you're in a lab that you realize, actually, I don't really like this, and it's not because I'm bad at it, it's just, I don't think this is for me. Listen to that. It's your life, and try to get experience that speaks to what could be a career for you in the future. And it's really hard because it takes time, but just kind of listen to those signals, and kind of trust yourself in that.
Yeah, I love that. I think finding out what you don't like matters just as much as finding out what you do like. And a lot of the times there's no shortcut for knowing what you don't like until you come face to face with and be like, I don't like this. There's a lot of things that you'll like, in theory and sounds good on paper, but until you like put in the time or do it day in and day out, and you're like, oh no, I'm miserable. So don't feel like you've backtracked at all if you like come across those experiences. I mean, I don't think you could have learned it any other way. And sometimes I see like senior undergrads be really rigid about the path they want to take. And I think maybe you just have some joy in the unfolding. Like my research interests have pivoted a lot, but I think it made for a really interesting history. I have something to talk about with everyone sometimes. So let that fold organically. I think a big part of staying motivated, as everyone has said, is finding something that you love researching and talking about and thinking about. Like, I love studying happiness. So even though sometimes the hours are long, I don't regret thinking about it or talking about it. It's something I want to do. So I hope everyone finds that in this room. Find out what you want to do, even if you do it for free. And naturally, that's what I was doing when I was a professional research analyst in some industry I didn't care about. So yeah, and it's all trial and error.
Thank you so much. We are all out of time, but I want to go ahead and share this. Stay connected both to our members and to our grad students. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. And for those of you who are here in person, we will now be transitioning into our cookie decorating social. And now to Tiffany.
Yes, but before our cookie decorating social, I do want to remind y'all that we have PwC camp coordinator and RSI co-director applications if y'all could apply, but also because this is our last fall general meeting, that means winter is coming soon, which also means elections are coming up. So begin thinking of these like leadership opportunities, and applying to PwC camp coordinator or RSI co-director looks really good. So yeah, that's all. Thank you all so much again for our panelists. And then we'll now transition to our social.
Hi, everyone.